Hello, my friend, and welcome back to the Bible Study Pod. And man, I want to tell you, this is going to be fun because actually at the beginning of the first iteration of this podcast, one of our most frequent people was my friend right across the street here, Mr. Mark Clark.
Well,
how you doing, Mark?
Thanks for having me, sir. The Bible Study, the one and only, the only Bible study you should be watching or leaning into. This one right here.
No, we love it. It's like the Ohio State of Bible studies. Okay.
You're doing a great job on this one, hosting.
The idea,
you're the Bible guy.
If you're new to the pod, is we just want to open up the Bible in the passages that we're actually teaching on the weekend at all of our campuses here at Bayside, and just explore what it means to be a great Bible study person. The hermeneutics, the rules you use to get the right interpretation, the exegesis, the attitude you bring to the text of saying we want the real original meaning, not our agenda or presuppositions. And we are in, to that end, Acts 27. You're not supposed to have favorite parts.
Right.
But I love Acts 27.
Okay.
It's the coming of the storm.
Yes.
In the storm, and then the shipwreck.
Right.
And, not to be too allegorical.
Sure.
A lot of storms in life. There's a lot of good stuff here and how Paul responded to that. Okay. I'm going to jump right into the passage here, Mark. We're going to go from verse 4. The context before verse 4 is Paul has finished all 3 missionary journeys. He's gone back to Jerusalem. Instead of being embraced in Jerusalem, man, everyone has got an issue with him. This creates a great uproar. He's arrested for other people's uproariousness. And the Romans are like, we don't even know what to charge you with, but we know we don't want you out in public. And Paul says, I demand to go to Rome and be tried as a Roman citizen.
Right.
So Julius, a very authoritative centurion, is put in charge of Paul. They get on a boat, then they're on another boat, and we pick up the story when the storm begins to build. So,
yes, love it.
Verse 4, just read till 12 here. If you're following along, I hope you are. Get out your Bible, 27:4. If you're driving, please don't do that, as always. Okay, here we go. Verse 4. From there, we, that's Luke writing, put out to the sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Sicilia and Pamphylia, we ended at Myra in Lycia. There, a centurion found an Alexandrian, that's Egyptian ship, sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Sindus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed for the lee of Crete, opposite of Salmone. We moved along the coast with difficulty, and came to the place called Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. Much had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was the day after atonement. Read there, late October. So Paul warned them, men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete facing both southwest and northwest. All right. If you were just sitting down, Mark Clark, you're in your backyard, beautiful Northern California, and you're studying the Bible. What is the first idea of approaching this passage and going, how do I study this passage?
Yeah, this is a great example of a passage that I'm not sure this one's on your fridge at home. I'm not sure. You're like, that's the one.
There's no Precious Moments collection statuette with this reference.
They're moving to Salome and through Cretonius. It's like, bored. Right. But so here's the first thing I would do. I would go, man, why is Luke telling us these details? And what you and I both know, because we're apologetics guys, is there's a great point to be made here about the boring verses are the verses that the Christians sometimes don't like, but the skeptics need.
That's so good.
Right? And so the skeptic is looking at this, and if Christianity is just this made up thing, then we don't need these people and these places. We don't need the islands. We don't need any of this. But Luke is framing Christianity in light of historical places, archaeological legitimacy, evidence, people, rulers.
Wind direction.
Different islands. And I was reading an archaeologist, and he talked about, I forget the exact number, but he said something between Luke and Acts. There's 96. He had all these stats: 96 islands, 14 cities, whatever it is, and none of them are wrong from like an archaeological. So the skeptic, first off, talking to a skeptic friend and going, you know what? This actually makes the Bible legitimate versus other religions where you don't get these details. If you've read some of it's just esoteric teachings on here's how to connect your soul to the universe and here's who God is, which is great, but they don't root it in history. So I think that's one great thing for these boring verses.
That.
Does that make sense?
I always say, what were Hansel and Gretel's, what was their address? What street did they live on?
Yeah. Why?
So C.S. Lewis talks about fabulization. So this is the much accusation against the Bible. Even before I was a Christian, I had zero Bible knowledge, didn't know the difference between the Old and New Testament. Somehow, I'd picked up on this idea that the Bible had been altered multiple times and had been fableized. I even thought, I can remember thinking that Jesus was not a historical character. He was several first century heroes that had been compiled together.
To an archetype of the...
And it was all good lessons and wonderful. And helpful, but it was a very fancy Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah.
And this is the direct, like what Lewis says is anyone accuses the New Testament, especially of being, or the Gospels especially of being fable, has never read fable.
Yeah.
Because this doesn't read like fable. We don't need to know Hansel and Gretel's address. We don't need to know if they're wearing lederhosen or Levi's. We just need to know that stay away from cannibalistic candy offering witches. That's all we need to know.
Great principle.
This is Luke going, see, we've switched back to the we here.
Yeah.
This is Luke going, I want to tell you all of the experiences we had. Because I literally hear Luke saying, man, if we'd only pulled in there, if we'd have got to Fairhaven. And then the other thing I love about this is that it smashes together several groups. And I always think this way when I'm, especially in Acts, smashes together several groups that are not normally smashed together. So you have Paul traveling with two Greeks. You have the Jewish, raised in Jerusalem, from Turkey, but raised in Jerusalem, Paul, traveling with two Greeks, overseen by a pretty benevolent, but still he's their prison keeper, Julius, the commander, on board a merchant ship that's got a load of wheat from Egypt that it's bringing to Italy, that this guy, unless he gets this wheat from Egypt to Italy, he doesn't get paid, and no one on his boat gets paid. And how do decisions get made? When you put all that crew together.
Here's the other thing I love about this passage. If you're a Christian and you're reading these passages and you're bored, not only is it good for the skeptic, I think about trying to get your brain into like great storytelling where it's like think about like Homer's Odyssey, right? I'm sure we don't read that on the daily, but it's one of the great stories ever told, to the point where Christopher Nolan is making a movie about it right now. He's going to retell the Odyssey story. They're shooting it all over Italy. They're shooting it all over. It's going to be it's Christopher Nolan. It's going to be incredible.
He's like, I am Homer.
I am Odysseus. And so Matt Damon is playing Odysseus, and it's going to be...
I didn't know that.
It's going to be... Everybody's on it. Everybody's in it, right? So it's going to be in Zendaya, all the big actors, and they're out in ships, and there's all these behind-the-scenes shots right now of them on the water, and they're dressed up in all these...
Why do I not know about this? This is awesome.
It's crazy. It's coming out next year. But the point of that is like... We miss the fact that these stories, these Homer stories, these where they're sailing around in ships to these different islands and having adventures, like that was the Netflix, that was the Stranger Things of the time. Like that's what you would read.
Right.
That's what these epic travel narratives.
Or retell.
Yeah, this is a travel narrative. This is like, there and back. Where are we going? And so anyway, that's what this is. It's the seas were against us. We're on a ship. We're moving. Like, we get bored by it, but this is actually great storytelling if you look at it through the vantage point of the great stories of all time that have swept up the hearts of people are these travel narratives of people going around in danger. They need to go to these, anyway. So that's the other layer.
So one of the things you always say, and I love saying this too, but I've heard this theme out of you so many times, is when you study the Bible, who are you in the story? And so it's probably good practice to put yourself in the place of every single person in the story.
Yeah,
but
that's good.
Who, hermeneutically, to get the proper idea, who should you be in this story? So
Great
I think
question.
the temptation is to be Paul or Luke.
Sure, of course.
So, Paul is the persecuted great missionary, and by the way, this is not a supernatural word of God, his warning here. This is Paul saying it's October, no one sails in November,
Right.
and very few sail in October, and September's already gone, guys.
Right.
And so put yourself, but I wonder if you're a business person out there, you put yourself in the pilot or the ownership.
Yes.
And go, have I ever made a foolish decision because I'm just worried? And of course, not to spoil they lose the cargo anyway.
Right.
Or you put yourself in the employee, the boat hands position, because it says the majority voted here. We have a little Greek democracy rearing its head here. And they went, oh yeah, I don't want a winter in Phoenix.
Right.
Which
I thought we all wanted the winter in Phoenix, by the way.
My wife
I guess
is
it's a
in
different
Crete.
Phoenix. Yeah.
And let's keep moving.
Yeah.
How often do we make a poor
that's good.
decision because of other forces compelling us? So the Roman, let's put ourselves in Julius's seat. He is a man of duty. He's not malicious. It's obvious here he's not malicious, but is he going, man, what happens to my reputation? He's a centurion. There's some commentators will say this particular group that he was centurion over, very famous, and he would have direct access to Caesar. Is he going, this is going to hurt my reputation? Caesar trusts me.
Yeah.
And so all these forces that get us to make stupid decisions.
That's good.
If we put ourselves in these people's spot, we'll go, oh yeah. Yeah, I've done that before.
Yeah.
Worried about the checkbook. This is very similar to whenever I tell Kelly, I think we can DIY this project at home.
Sure.
And then I spend a lot of money to
More
do
money
the
than
project.
you ever would have to just buy it.
Yes. And then I have to call in the contractor anyway.
Yes.
So I end up paying both bills.
Of course.
Because
I've done that multiple times.
Because a lack of discernment. So a lot of times I think we're great at teaching faith when to take a risk for God.
Yeah.
We lack saying, gosh darn, this is a whole discernment foul here.
Yeah.
Discernment is when not to take a risk for God.
Yeah.
And
here's the other thing that popped to me as I was reading this. And this is the preacher in us, right? We're always looking at this hermeneutically going, okay, great history, but our people are just trying to keep their marriages together and not be fired from work and, not look at bad things on the internet. So what do we do with them?
The two big problems facing America.
So there's this, they're sailing, it's become dangerous. So much time had been lost, so you get into like, hey, do you ever feel like you get to the end of your life and you're 70 and let's live from backwards, Ecclesiastes. Let's make sure, if your kids are super young right now, there's going to be a day when they're out of the house. So make sure you appreciate them and you don't lose the time. There's things like that are popping. But one of the ones that hit me was, and this is a bit of a deep point. So verse 10, men, I see that our voyage is going to be disastrous, right? So this is one of my favorite words on the planet as a preacher is you're a disaster and you're all a wreck and blah, blah, blah. And I tell people this all the time. And people kind of, they make fun of it, blah, blah, blah. But recently, and just give me a moment here, I wrote this book, just came out. This is not a promo, by the way, called The Problem of Life. But there's a paragraph, okay? Let me read a paragraph because sometimes I think what happens is here's Paul and he's being Mr. Negative. Okay,
right.
This is going to be a disaster.
He's Debbie Downer.
He's Debbie Downer,
the apostle.
Yeah. So what we tend to do is go Debbie Downers. Like you shouldn't listen to Debbie Downers. Like we do debriefs for things, and we're like, let's keep it. Let's make sure we're doing that. And then no villains. Yeah. So here's an interesting psychological study I came across while I was writing this book. This just stood out to me as I just read this. So psychologist James Davies calls it the importance of suffering, saying that it is a mistake to interpret a patient who suffers from low self-esteem or feelings of worthlessness as simply suffering from distorted thinking patterns or thinking errors. Instead, what if our negative thoughts about ourselves are actually right? The feeling of being cowardly may not be faulty thinking at all, but an accurate appraisal of part of us that is cowardly. Facing that reality, the psychologist says, rather than denying it, it's the prerequisite to changing. He then points out that many people, instead of being plagued with low self-esteem, are actually plagued with self-love. So much so that they're unable to love others and cannot see beyond the horizon of their own needs and concerns. The prevailing view that the depressed person tends to distort reality in a negative way may be wrong. And then I end the paragraph with this quote: research has turned this wisdom on its head, saying that it's not the depressive who distorts reality, but the so-called healthy population, because they remove the positive self-biases that are seen in the non-depressed.
Well, that is
Isn't that crazy?
That's a tonic for our culture.
Right
there.
It's like we always think the guy going, this is going to be a disaster, is, he's got low self-esteem. He's got reality distortion. And
Get
it's
a
like,
self-help book in your life and do it.
And it's like sometimes, no, it's that you are a coward.
Yes.
And that's the prerequisite to changing.
Yes.
So instead, when someone says, I'm a coward, don't just say, oh, no, you're not. You're a good guy. Remember that time I saw you?
Yeah.
It's like, no, letting them sit in that may be the foundation of them changing and becoming less cowardly.
Yes.
So anyway, I just, that kind of jumped out at me as like,
by the way, that was not a promo. This is a great book. By the way, what I love about this book is it has all the content in it you'd want for who are we really? Sure. Yeah. But it's beautiful.
Yeah. Well,
There's some beauty in there. There's
Thank you.
You don't leave it going, oh, what a horrible problem that we're all flawed.
Yes.
You leave it going, this is more complex, this thing called life.
Yeah.
And there's some beautifulness in the problem.
Oh, thank you.
So anyway, I really mean that. So,
so anyway, I guess my point here is he sees the disaster, he calls it out, and actually that can be a good thing. And sometimes you need people in your life that are going to call out the disaster.
If you listen to it,
100%. Yes.
So Brady, on this point, Brady Bobick is an incredible, faithful Western Washington University in Washington State. He was there for 40 plus years, just reaching students. No one will ever know his name. He's never in any global conferences, and he'll be ahead of me by 3 miles in the kingdom line to meet Jesus. So he would say this. Paul said, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. Mm-hmm. And so he said, what is that? What is that standard in Christianity? It's one of the most direct self-concept statements. And he said, the standard of Christianity is not high self-esteem. I'm great. I can overcome everything. I have no flaws. You are, and darn it, people love you. Right. That sort of thing. Right. It's also not low self-esteem.
Right.
Don't think of yourself higher than you ought.
Sure.
So it's not, I'm a horrible, depraved sinner with no redeemable qualities. So he'd say that standard of Christianity self-concept is not low or high. It's objectivity. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's the truth?
Yes.
What is the truth? The truth is, I have a problem with bravery. Mm-hmm. The truth is, I'm easily swayed by crowds. Mm-hmm. The truth is, I grew up in a large family, and when you grow up in a large family, is you just want to be seen. So that's why I talk too much. I know I've used it for some good, but it's
one of the great talkers of the 21st century.
So early on in my career here at Bayside, Ray said everyone's going to do 360s, and it's going to cost like $600 or $700 for this group to do a 360 on everyone at the senior pastor level. I said, I'll save you the money. It's going to come back. Kurt's a nice guy. He talks too much. That's what it's going to come back. And because that from third grade report card on.
Yeah.
So. And I've always thought that is so healthy and good. Objectivity, what?
Yes. But if everyone said to you, no, you don't, just be you don't talk too much. That's not going to help you.
Disservice.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
On the other hand, of going, man, I love what you had to say. Say it less.
Yeah.
It's a very good piece of advice for me. Okay, the verse that popped out of me, and then I want to hear your comment on this. Yeah. We moved along the coast with difficulty. We moved along the coast with difficulty.
Where is that?
It's verse 8.
Okay,
so the whole, almost from verse 4 to 9, he's just making that point. The sailing. And so there's two thoughts that come at me with this, Mark, when I ask myself, what is this really trying to say to us? Why did Luke think this was important to include? And one is, I think they can easily see the storm coming. So the storm is not a surprise. So oftentimes, like when you watch tornado movies, they go, oh, the tornado came out of nowhere. Oh, no, we're trapped. That's not how it works. The storm front that creates tornadoes is easily seeable way before the tornado comes. Now, the tornado itself, that moment of crisis might come quickly, but the signs that it's coming are obvious to see. There's a thing called a shelf cloud. It's a huge, massive collision of warm and cold air, moist and dry air. This is what happens in the Mediterranean. It's what happens in the Midwest of America, by the way, why Kansas gets all their tornadoes. You can see it coming. And so Luke here is saying, yeah, we were tacking a sailing technique for multiple days and not making any progress. By the way, if there's any sailors out there, leave this in the comment, because I have no idea how you get a wind-driven vehicle to go into the wind and move forward.
Yes.
But apparently you can by getting pushed to the side. But the important point here is, if you've ever been in a sailboat that was tacking, it's arduous. Like the sail is shifting every couple minutes.
Sure.
The crew is working incredibly hard. It's not just we're clipping through the waves. So Luke is really saying, we are exhausted. This has been very difficult.
That's good.
And yet, we're still going to pound our head against this problem. So like a few weeks ago, we had a passage. I'm trying to remember what it was. Paul moves on from Ephesus, I think it was. Sometimes the will of God is not stick-to-itiveness. It's not just, putting our roots down and saying we're not. Sometimes moving on is going, yeah, it's not working.
Right.
We did what God wanted us to do here.
Right.
And without guilt or condemnation, saying this ain't working.
Yeah.
But often I think we just preach the opposite all the time. Like, be committed, stay through.
Sure.
Being committed is more nuanced than just keep beating your head against the wall.
Yeah.
And it's clearly, I think, what they're trying to say here, what Luke's trying to say here.
I like it. So I think one of the other things is, and you've heard this too, about Luke Acts being like a mirror of each other, and how Paul becomes the Jesus figure of Luke, where he takes Paul through the same kinds of things near the end of his life that Jesus goes through. And so it's like multiple, trials. And so if you take that kind of filter and you go, what is this? It's kind of like, are we in the Garden of Gethsemane right now? And this is like the last torturous pushing against the difficulty, all of that before, because the thing's about to end. The shipwreck, I think, and I'm not being allegory here, I'm saying if you were to try to play that thing out, the shipwreck becomes almost like the cross. It's like this is the final suffering moment, and then
wood involved.
There's wood. And so but that's what I'm trying to think through is like, and then of course you and I as preachers go, okay, well now, yes, this is literal wind, but we all have difficulty in our life and we all get up against things, and how are we going to get through all this stuff? And then the other thing that popped to me was the Day of Atonement. The fact that Luke tells us this, and obviously it's, it's a time of year that he's, to your point, he's telling us what time of year it is, but it's also a theological statement about like thinking through what was Yom Kippur in the Old Testament, what did it do, and how is the gospel now that solution, all of that. So,
and also, how much did Paul want to be a part of the Day of Atonement in Jerusalem, as opposed to being a prisoner on this second boat on his way to Rome? I mean, he presses so hard in the chapters earlier to get to Jerusalem. You got to think that part of why Luke is bringing this up because he wants us to know we're in storm season, but he's also bringing it up and going, we are not where our personal preference would have had us be. Not Paul, especially. Maybe Luke and the other Greek fellow that's with him. But you got to think Paul's love for being in Jerusalem during Passover is a part of
100%.
What he's saying here. I also think, Mark, tell me if you think I'm wrong about this. Part of what's going on here is Luke is trying to get us to understand the difference between just normal day-to-day discernment. And then again, spoiler alert, then at the end it gets really supernatural.
Right.
And how both are important, that we don't walk around on this supernatural counsel every moment. We use our common sense, we worship God with our minds, we think. And then there is an element where the storm gets so bad, God's got to say, hey, by the way, you and the whole boat is going to be saved because you got to make it to Rome. Right. And I think part of this story is Paul lived a life where they both worked together.
Yeah.
It wasn't always raising Eutychus from the grave.
Sure.
It was teaching foundations of faith. Both those two things go together in that story. And then you do a Kevin Thompson here. So Kevin's been on this podcast many times. The great thing Kevin does here is he goes, in the epistles, where does this experience show up for Paul? Mm-hmm. So I immediately go, Paul's walking in discernment here. He's saying the unpopular thing because it's true. Mm-hmm. He's not planning an escape. He's not hiding down in the bottom of the boat going, well, let these guys all drown.
Right, like Jonah. Yeah.
He's doing what he can do and saying the truth and walking in that discernment. And then later on, he writes this from Rome. Timothy, in all things, make sure to always keep your head. Mm-hmm. And I look at it and go, oh, he's talking about this. Mm-hmm. He's talking about the moments in the book of Acts where he had to fight against all of his freak out, all of his anger. Mm-hmm. You guys are going to kill me. You're going to kill my friends. Mm-hmm. Instead, he's going, gentlemen. And then later on, it's so cool. He goes, and by the way, I was very right about what I said to you in that part of 27.
Yes.
So speak to that a little bit to me. Where does natural discernment and keeping your head and being a calm thinker, and where does, we're flying by the seat of the pants on a supernatural unction that God has given us. Where do those?
Yeah, I think, what does Keller say? He says it used to be when he spoke at conferences, the number one packed out breakout room would be, whatever it was back in the day, music and ministry or something like that. The music wars or whatever.
Or the drums from Africa of the devil.
Yeah, exactly. Now, he said...
They're not, by the way.
Yeah, if I could do a breakout called Discerning the Will of God, it'll be rammed.
Yes.
Because everyone wants to discern the will of God in their life. And so the question becomes, how do we do that? And I think there's been moments... you're talking about there's supernatural times where God, you've had these, God shows up and he gives you a word, he gives you clarity. But for me, that's like 1% of the time. Most of my life is spent in confusion of what I'm supposed to do, right? What am I supposed to do? Yes. What am I supposed to do in this scenario? And I don't get the super clear Holy Spirit moment of Acts 2 where the tongues come out and everyone's like, oh gosh, the Holy Spirit just did something. This is clear. It's more, this is normal life. This is the average day where you're like, I don't know, we're supposed to go to that place. This thing's going to crash. This cargo's going to fall. This guy's going to die. I don't know, man, guys. And then there's, so Kevin DeYoung wrote a book years ago called Just Do Something. And I love it because it basically said, we are a very entitled generation that thinks that God should tell us all the information.
Yes.
Right. He should tell us who we're going to marry. He should tell us he should write it in the stars. Am I supposed to marry Scott? And God will you'll be in your alphagettis and it'll go, Scott. And you'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to, whatever. Yeah. And it's that's not really how God works. And it's a very entitled, because the gap of that information is called faith. He doesn't get to tell you, he's not going to tell you everything. There's going to be moments of clarity and beauty and supernatural. And then most of our life is spent going, to DeYoung's point, just do something.
Yeah.
So it's not who you're going to marry. He says it's whoever you marry, serve them like Christ served the church.
Yes.
That's what God tells you.
Yes.
That's the information he gives you.
Yes.
He doesn't tell you whether you're supposed to live in New York or Pittsburgh all the time.
Right.
Make a choice. Wherever you live, serve that city as Christ would have you serve.
Right.
Right. And of course, there are times, though, where it's and you had it when you came down here. I had it when I came down here. I had it when I married Aaron. I had it when I planted a church.
The Macedonian man.
Exactly.
The second missionary journey, it's very supernatural.
Exactly. You have those moments, but don't count on them. most of the time, just the reason God gave you a brain is because you're supposed to look at the winds and the data and go, this seems like the best plan.
Yeah.
And then you always give a gap for, well, I was...
Like everything else, when we say, God, I wish you'd just be more clear about my future and all my decisions. If he really was, we would hate it.
Yes.
We would
when
hate
you
it.
want to know, if you could know right now the day you're going to die and how you're going to die, we do know.
Absolutely not. No. It's probably this week, coronary. It's probably this week.
Wow. Well, I'll be hosting the Bible study next
chest pains right
episode.
Now. I say this to our folks in Auburn all the time. I say, listen, first of all, God's not worried which job you're going to take. I had a kid come to me and say, Pastor Kurt, which job should I take this summer? And I said, well, give me the options. I said, which one will make you closer to Jesus? He said, they're about the same. I said, which one is a better mission field? They're about the same. I said, well, tell me the options. He said, well, one is working at the Chick-fil-A and the other one's a job I got offered at Burger King. I'm like, God didn't care.
Chicken or burgers,
God does not care.
Yeah.
He's asking the question, how much do you trust me? How are you treating people?
Yeah.
All this sort of
100%.
stuff right here.
That's great.
So, all right, let's get to the application moment because you're so fun to talk with. We're already way there. And Bree off stage. Hi, Bree. How you doing?
What's up, Bree? She's waving at us.
The real
us
frontal lobe of this pod.
Quiet. Land this plane.
Here's my one application thought. And then I'll give you the last word because you're brilliant. Okay, here's my application thought. What hard to hear thing are you not listening to? So again, putting ourselves in the seat of Julius and the pilot and the boat owner and the boat crew instead of Paul and Luke. What's one hard thing that someone is telling you and you know it's true and you just do not want to hear it? So there's a way I am spending my time right now. Not bad. It's not sinful. My wife is fully informed. My team is fully informed. I just don't think it's the best way to spend my time. And I need to really sit down and go, I've got to eliminate this and this from my schedule so I can do this and this. But I don't really want to. And there's stuff like that in all of our life. And we sat for a moment and just said, I've been given this advice. I'm not listening to it. We would probably see some really, really good breakthroughs if we just accepted that hard to accept thing.
Yeah, that's really good. Mine would be the difficulty is inevitable. Turn struggles into strengths. Here's disappointment with God is inevitable in a sense of like if you just from a pure. I'm not saying it's right to be disappointed with God because who are we? But like we feel it sometimes in life. And I think about where this story goes. There's only one chapter left in this book. In chapter 28, I forget where Paul says it, but I think about this often. I think he says it in Romans somewhere where he's like, hey, I need to get to Spain because Spain is going to be like my main hub of missionary activity. And I need to plan to, right? Do you remember this passage? I can't remember where it is, but it's somewhere.
It's Romans. It's got to be Romans.
Where he goes, I got to get to Spain. I got to get to Spain. My whole plan is to get to Spain.
Rome is not. I'm going to Rome to get to Spain.
To get to Spain. Even though Rome obviously is the center of the world. It's where, blah, blah. And the whole book ends, literally the last verses of this book are not like, and Paul rose from the dead and ascended into heaven and did some awesome stuff. It's he's under house arrest in Rome and the book ends. Right. He never gets to Spain.
Right.
And we don't really know what happened to him. But I remember N.T. Wright pointing this out. He said, C.S. Lewis, he always wanted to be a poet. That was what he he was an Oxford scholar, of course, and he was brilliant to your point earlier about he would read these medieval stories and these fables and the linguistics of it.
Yeah.
And he was saturated in this stuff. Right. I mean, like he was, from the time he was like 6 years old, he's reading Greek in the original. He's doing it's just different level, right?
Yeah.
So his whole world was like medieval thinking and thought and poetry. And he always wanted to be a poet. And he was never a published poet. No one ever really cared about his poetry.
Right.
But on the way to writing poetry, he just happened to write Narnia and Mere Christianity and Screwtape Letters. And he's doing all these things that are like on the side.
Yes.
But I really want this thing.
Yes.
And God's like, yeah. Whatever. Yeah. I need you to get to house arrest under Rome, and then your story's over. You're not going to Spain.
Right.
Because you don't even know. You're on one train of thought. All the things that God's accomplishing when you're trying to do something else.
Yes.
Right? And you're disappointed you couldn't do that thing, and God's been doing all this other stuff along the way, I think is an encouragement to me.
Yeah. 100%.
If I never accomplish that goal, maybe my way along the way, the journey, is actually the point.
Right.
And maybe I'm blessing people along the way in ways I never even dreamt of.
Yeah.
And this looks like a disappointment. Paul's whole thing ends under house arrest in Rome.
Right.
Like, that's not a hero's end.
Right.
But it is. This is where God's like, hey, that's what I needed you for. We're good.
Yep.
So anyway. So those disappointing moments that you have with God, just realize he's using them.
Seeking first the kingdom. Lots of good stuff happen that you don't even realize happened. All right. So here's what I want to tell you. The next 2 podcasts of the Bible study are going to be during the storm and after the storm. Mm-hmm. And frankly, the finish of this storm, I think, you're not supposed to have favorite parts of the book of Acts, but other than Acts chapter 1 and 2, this is my favorite little section here. So you don't want to miss it.
Yeah.
So on the podcast, the next time, we're going to have John Maxwell and Nikki Gumbel,
right?
And
who else? Christine Kane, the Pope, the new Pope is going to be
Bree. Is that right?
We just booked him. He just got elected.
As far as
his
you know,
first priority,
or it could be one of the great thinkers and communicators in the Bayside universe. It's one of
those,
the others,
or just you hanging out.
It could be me and Dina. And by the way, don't protest. We're bringing Dina back.
Oh,
so here's the point. Don't miss the next 2 podcasts. And again, I just want to tell you. All the podcasts in the Thrive Podcast, they're worth you checking out. The marriage one, March.
Change the odds. Yeah,
change the odds.
I have one, yeah.
It's fun, it's funny, and it's amazingly helpful. So check all those out. And again, thank you so much for caring about the Bible study. It's a big, big deal, and I really appreciate you watching. Would you please subscribe, like, follow, get the word out for us, because the more people that actually take Bible study seriously, I think the better off we're all going to be.
Let's go. Great job, Kurt.